Welcome to Antique Sprinklers. We're finally up to the final installation on our series on the history of the Buckner Rocker Jet. And it's been quite a long road. We started back in the 1920s with Fingalore and his vertical impact, and then moved on into the 1940s when his patent ran out, and Buckner started running with a full circle version in multiple sizes for the agricultural market. Through improvements in the bearings and the levers for those in the early 1950s, and then into the part circle rocker jets that were meant more for the turf market in the mid 1950s, and now we're all the way up into the mid 1960s and into what was really the final iteration for Buckner for these really fascinating sprinklers. And did you ever think you'd see so many rocker jets in one place in your whole life? I know I didn't. And it's been a pleasure sharing all of this with you guys as you come along this journey with us. So for this final episode, we're going to be talking about one ag rocker jet, the 212. And then we're going to be talking about the final version of the 503M, the 512M, the 522M, and then also talking about a couple of different other companies or other brands that made rocker jets. So for example, Febco's Thunder Jet, and the one that I have here is an M71, and it's the equivalent to the 512M. Or later, around the very late 70s and very early 80s, when Royal Coach added a 3-inch rocker jet that eventually was taken over by WeatherTech. Or back in '59, when Buckner added an 1.5 and a 2-inch adjustable part circle rocker jet, the 5900 and 5910, and we'll talk about all of those in greater details. So when we're talking about the M series, the first thing that springs to mind is this sort of batwing shaped nozzle that is meant to be anti-backsplash. So, you know, on a regular impact sprinkler, if you have something that's anti-backsplash, it's going to hang off to the side because the lever is intersecting the flow of water from the side, right? And knocking it that way. In the case of the rocker jets, the lever's coming up like this and knocking the water straight back and up. And so they came up with this sort of shield that they patented in 1965. And it's one-piece casting in bronze where you have the nozzle and then it fans out further out, and there's a room for a diffuser screw right through the center of the very tip of it. And that's the main thing that people think about when they think about the M series. But they'd also made other pretty significant changes. And so, you know, this sort of click set arc adjustment had come along for the 503, 512, and 520-22 before the M series. And it had that breakaway trip pin as well, but it was still on the front of the sprinkler and still had sort of this hoop changer look to it. And then the other thing that is significantly different, besides the nozzle and besides the arc adjustment and trip mechanism, is the lever itself. And the back end of the lever before the M series sort of had its bulbous look to it, and it's a little bit hollowed out underneath, but it's very rounded. For the M series, Buckner introduced a much sleeker, I don't know if you want to say aerodynamic, more modern kind of looking lever, and that was in every single size all the way up to the 522. In the ag market, where they added this guy around 1964 or 1965 as near as we can tell, the big change in adding the 212 was that it's the one of the only rocker jets to have an all bronze lever on it. And this guy, I don't think lasted all that long. I don't recall it being in any of the 1970s catalogs. I think that they were mostly going with the 211 and 221 and 250 for most of the 1970s in agriculture. And but it's kind of interesting. It's cool to see an all bronze rocker jet. I was taken in one time by a website that had something called the 500 on it, and it was an all bronze adjustable part circle rocker jet. And then I found out later that as a prank, or just as something cool to have, the guy had actually commissioned making that. It was one of one. So we talked about the 503, the 512, and the the 522 in terms of their performance before, and you know, the nozzle sizes mostly remain the same for the M series as well. The body styles changed to facilitate having the trip mechanism on the back of the sprinkler, for one thing. And then, you know, a significant change in sort of the overall landscape of irrigation manufacturers happened around this exact same time. It would have been about 1965 when General Sprinkler Company, which was the parent of Buckner and owned by James Coson, purchased Febco. And I'm not going to get too deep into the history of Febco. I think the name's cool because it represents the first initial of each of his kids' first names, plus the O on the end is for old man, which was him. So the F, it was a guy named Fred Reinecke who started the company in 1949. He'd been a Brooks distributor, you know, Brooks in Detroit, and it was called Brooks of California, and he'd started that business in Los Angeles in 1924. 25 years later, the agreement runs out. He starts Febco. His name's Fred Reinecke. There's a Fred Jr., so that's the F. There's an Edwin, there's a Bill, there's a Charlotte, and then O is the old man. So I always thought that was a really cool name. Anyhow, he turns that business over to his kids later in the 50s. Edwin ends up being the lieutenant governor of California and heavily involved in politics. And then in the mid-60s, they sell to Coson. And the Thunder Jet, which is a rocker jet, but with a Febco brand on it, ends up in the Febco product line shortly thereafter. And I think that's cool. And they made 3 different sizes, just like the 503, the 512, and the 522. I think they were the 70, the 71, and the 72, but with an M for that M-style nozzle. You know, the other observation I'd make about that nozzle is I have never seen a rocker jet that had anything other than patent pending printed on the back of that nozzle. I am sure that there were some that came out later that just had the patent number or nothing at all on them, but I have never run into one. Just an observation there for you. So I'm going to show a picture of the 5910 that I used to have. I traded it for some cam rotors some time ago, and it was kind of interesting. The bore of the sprinkler, kind of sort of that range tube and nozzle. Range tube's not the right term for it, but you know what I mean. The sprinkler seems to turn a 90-degree angle and head into its nozzle. And it does have an aluminum arm, but on the back of it, the counterweight is a cast bronze piece that fits directly over the back, giving the back end of the lever that rounded shape, and it bolts into it. And they worked pretty good. A buddy of mine told me about an old-timer having to go out and actually shave down the lever of those to make them work right. And the guy just had a magic touch with those. And I think that's a skill that's probably lost to time. So WeatherTech is the other company in this equation. And Royal Coach had a very large 3-inch rocker jet that they'd introduced. And in the early 80s, they sold that to WeatherTech that was owned by Bob Rogers at the time. And this fella I know that worked for Royal Coach Buckner at the time remembers turning over, you know, all the designs and patterns and molds and stuff like that to Bob so that he could start manufacturing them under the WeatherTech shingle. And then around 7 years or so after that, I came along as a young guy and for a project near Winchester, Virginia. There is a big apple processing plant there, and their wastewater has just a lot of stuff that's left over from chopping up apples in it. And they would truck it off to a site and then pump it out and spray it over this huge spray field and let it leach, making a leach field, you know, to get rid of the effluent that way. And we used those WeatherTech rocker jets on it pretty effectively. They didn't clog or anything. That was nice of them. And they were such a simple mechanism that they would just work and work and work and work. And so that is my one personal experience other than owning that 2-inch 5910 for a couple of months with the larger sized rocker jet. So a couple of things are pretty clear to me about the rocker jet. One, it was very unique. Two, when Johns Manville took over Buckner, they didn't seem to care too much about the sprinkler. No advances were really made with it. And when Coson started another company called Royal Coach, he was really only interested in filling in the larger size of his agricultural line with it, and not doing much else. And then, as soon as possible, well, maybe not as soon as possible, very early on in having it in the line, sold it off. And so I guess maybe time caught up with the rocker jets. And it was an era where plastic was becoming much more dominant as a material. And certainly these are intricate devices, even though they're very simple. There's a lot of parts to manufacture, and they're not made of cheap material. And time just caught up with them. Plus, we've noted the ways in which they can be temperamental. Certainly, well before the year 2000, no one was making a rocker jet for the professional market or the agricultural market. Any kind of a turf oriented rocker jet like we're talking about with the M series had gone out of production by 1980. So to lift us up out of that ending of the product line, we're going to show you each one of these guys in operation. I wish we had some video of one of the big guys, but they're kind of hard to come by these days, so we don't. But we do have every single one of the M's. We've got the 212 to show you, and we've got my little Thunderjet here to show you in operation. Again, we can't thank you enough. This was supposed to be a 4-part series. It ended up taking 6 parts to get through it. I'm glad we did. There's a lot of differences in each of these, and it's such an iconic sprinkler that it really deserved the attention that we gave it, I feel anyway. If you feel differently or the same, feel free to leave a comment. The other thing I'd say is if you leave a comment, it really helps to hit the like button too. The algorithm determines whether it's going to show the video to other people, largely based on how many likes it gets. That shows positive engagement. So if you don't mind taking a minute now and just hitting the like button, that'd be really great, and it would help out the video quite a bit. As always, though, we really appreciate that you watch. Check out the playlist that has the other content creators stuff that I really like. It grows every week, so there's always something new on there. And thanks for watching.
Here we have a 522M, somehow sprouted out of a boulder. Another 522M.